All right, thank you so much for coming, everybody. We are Trajectory Labs. We are a nonprofit co-working and event space for AI safety practitioners in Toronto. And yeah, almost every Tuesday and Thursday, we host events related to AI safety, trying to figure out what are the most important problems that need to be solved to make sure AI goes well for humans. And yeah, if you're interested in getting involved in a deeper capacity, you're at the right spot. If you do need to go to the washrooms, you can go through the glass doors. If you come back in, please be sure to use the pin. And yeah, we're going to be talking about how you can help steer us towards a positive AI future. I am question friendly for short questions, like points of clarification through the presentation. If your question takes like 5 sentences to say, that's more of a monologue than a question. So best to save that for the end. We're going to have a discussion period. But if you are curious about something, feel free to just throw up your hand as we go. And without further ado, let's get into it. Right, so today's talk is, there's no single primary source for this. This is mainly Mario's own hot takes, and kind of, it's going to be a combination of a survey of a bunch of different possible subfields you can get involved in, and then peppered with my opinion on whether or not you should do that. So yeah, there's going to be roughly 3 parts to this. First, we're just going to have a quick introduction. We're going to talk about some different frameworks, that is, just different useful cognitive tools that I use for assessing whether or not something is a good or bad idea to go into. And then the bulk of the presentation will be talking about various concrete approaches. We'll talk about technical AI safety work you can do, stuff in governance and activism, and just a catch-all field. So that's us. All right, diving in, who is you? It's essentially people in this room. If you're interested in getting involved in a capacity where you can dedicate a lot of time and effort, that means something like if you're open to changing your career, if you're open to volunteering considerable amounts of time and off hours, or if you happen to have a non-negligible amount of money to fund projects. You don't necessarily have to do this work, but you can help incentivize other people to do it. And it's helpful to have some sort of skill sets of people who have technical chops, people who have research experience or experience in law or policy, or if you have the capacity to learn these skills. So I also thought this slide, you might be thinking, well, like, yeah, duh, that's just a person who can do things. But I mean, I'm contrasting this to a presentation where we kind of talk about, like, this is what society needs to do. This is a bit more like, here's what you as an individual could potentially do about this. So we're not going to be talking about like how we wish, society had been organized. We're talking about concrete steps that you as an individual can take. Yeah, the second thing I'd like to talk a bit about are just some background assumptions. You kind of have to assume that humanity might develop AGI sometime soon. AGI, you don't worry about how it's defined. It is kind of a nebulous term. I just mean we're talking about artificial intelligence that's about as capable as a human being, or more powerful, or something equivalent to that. Something where we're expecting like an extremely big impact on society, kind of industrial revolution or larger. This assumes you expect that there's at least a non-negligible chance that happens in the coming years or decades. And then the second thing you need to assume is that there's something you can do about it. If you think that's going to happen, but like we're kind of, there's a certain fate we're consigned to, then again, this presentation not going to be for you. So the way I see it, there's broadly 2 ways you can think that we can influence how this goes. One is if you believe we can stop the development of these AI systems. Some people take that approach. Or even if you don't think we can stop the development of highly advanced AI, or if you think it's not good to because the benefits outweigh the harms, then you might be interested in trying to adjust the conditions under which it's developed. So there are kind of at least 2 ways you can think about this. One is you can think about what I'll call differential technological development. And the other one is broader societal geopolitical situation. So the differential technological development idea is like, anyone out there play the game Civilization? Okay, a few people. This is in a lot of games. There's like a tech tree, and it's just a way of, this is roughly analogous. This is like an oversimplified version of how it works in reality, that like, once you discover like, these 3 technologies, you can then research this one. And, the idea here being, it's unlikely you're going to develop particle physics before you've developed like metallurgy. There are certain prerequisites, and there is like broadly one direction the tech tree moves in, but it makes a big difference which parts of it you develop first. One example would be it makes a big difference how things go for humans if we develop the ability to very rapidly create new personalized vaccines before we develop the ability to rapidly develop new engineered superbugs. So that's one way you can try to see, okay, which parts of a tech tree do we want to make sure we prioritize developing before the other parts? The other way to think about this is the broader societal geopolitical situation. Think of something like the nuclear bomb. I think a lot of people would argue, and I would agree with them, that in a certain sense, its development is probably inevitable given a certain level of other technologies being developed, but it makes a big difference the conditions under which it's developed. Had it been developed under peacetime when there was no war going on, we might be living in a world where no cities had ever gotten nuked. Had it been developed during a war that was maybe a lot closer, World War II was kind of, the Americans were largely winning the war against Japan already. Had it been a situation where two powers discovered around the same time in a more tense war, we might have seen even more uses of nuclear weapons. So yeah, this is just another example of how, even aside from other technology exists, the kind of situation on the ground when technology is developed can make a big difference. So you might be looking to influence those conditions in some fashion. And this is going to roughly tie to like, you can argue this section will be a bit more relevant to more technical types of AI safety. This section is a bit more relevant to things like governance or the other category. But again, there's not a super clean division. And you can probably think of some other ways that which we can illustrate this. All right, so assuming that you agree with at least with these two propositions and at least one of these two, you're in the right place. Let's keep going. Yeah, now we're going to get into some frameworks. So these are just some useful things that I find to just think about what are the different ways we can have an impact. So the first, I spent a lot of time thinking about the different categories of risk and which ones we should be prioritizing. So right now I think of there are these 4 different ways things can go very wrong. There's power concentration. Like let's say, we get like a really advanced AI system, but it's just controlled by, one government or kind of leadership at one company, and they manage to kind of assert their dominance over the world, acquire way more resources for themselves. It's easy to imagine that this could lead to some sort of authoritarian nightmare scenario. I should hold the mic closer to my face. Okay, cool. The second type of risk is malicious misuse. So maybe there isn't a massive concentration of power, but the tools we develop can be very easily used by, let's say, terrorists or some other bad actors to cause large-scale catastrophes. Then there are AI takeover scenarios. These are types of risks where we develop extremely capable advanced systems that, for whatever reason, end up seeking power for themselves and, forcibly taking over the world's economy against our will. And then there are gradual disempowerment scenarios. These are like, even if we solve these 3 types of scenarios, we could see a situation where just more and more economically valuable work goes over to automated systems, and eventually there's no human in the loop anywhere, and there's no kind of malicious government in charge, but just we kind of wake up several decades from now and humans don't really get a say over what goes on anymore. Giles. This is a thumbs down because I think it would be bad if these things happened. It's a great question to lead into the other half of this, which are the thumbs up scenarios. I think it'd be good if we got these things. So if we do solve the power concentration issue, I think that we get something that I'm going to call egalitarian abundance. That is, we do get a lot of resources, we get a lot of cool new technologies, and they're relatively well distributed across the population. You don't have extreme wealth disparities or power disparities. If we can manage to solve the malicious misuse scenario, I see that as a kind of, you have a stable offense-defense balance equilibrium, Either it's very, very hard for bad actors to misuse the tools, or it's very, very easy for individuals or anyone to defend themselves against those bad uses. And then, yeah, the positive outcome for, like, if we avoid both of these scenarios, we effectively have some sort of continued human agency. We have a world where humans can still express their preferences in some fashion, where we're still either doing having meaningful input into decisions about kind of what happens with the Earth's resources. So yeah, thumbs down because I think this is a very useful framework. So thumbs up on the framework, Mario. I use this a lot thinking about things. But yeah, avoid these things. If we manage to, we should get these things. All right, the second useful thing to think about is just how fast do you expect this technology to be developed? And okay, and so actually I'm going to go back just to emphasize. So while we're going through these framework slides, again, the purpose of going through them is because they're supposed to inform which areas of a kind of research or career development. If you're like if you're very confident we're going to solve like power concentration and takeover risks, but you think bad actors will use it, then you're going to focus on types of careers that will kind of emphasize this. Right, so speed and pace of development. So yeah, this chart is from, if you guys don't know Meter, they are a nonprofit org that effectively measures AI capabilities and progress. This is one version of a chart that has been quite popular recently, showing the advancements in the length of time of a task that an AI can complete. As you can see, it is going up and to the right. This is meant to demonstrate that AI capabilities are rapidly improving. Now, there's a big question mark of whether or not this will continue at the same pace, in which case we will soon find ourselves in a situation where AIs can do most or all of the activities humans can do. We might hit some sort of point where it like levels off, and you know it's it's too expensive, or we don't know how to make AIs do even longer time frame tasks. But there's 1,000 of these charts you could look up that try to measure things in different ways, and it makes a big difference whether or not you expect to hit human level intelligence in an AI, you know, next year or in the year 2050. Personally, I have a pretty widely distributed range. I don't think it's super likely we get AGI in the next 3 years, but I don't rule it out. I also think it's quite plausible it takes a couple more decades. I just, in general, very uncertain about this. But if you are highly confident one way or another, that will inform where you want to have your impact. Yeah, related to this is incremental improvements versus discrete thresholds. That is, on the left, we have what incremental progress would looks like. It's just you expect, you know, very, very slow and steady, or not necessarily slow, but very, very kind of gradual, like bit by bit progress, where like, you know, the tools of like, you know, 1 year don't look that different than the tools from the year before. They're on similar architecture and they gradually improve over time. This is more kind of a, you have these sudden bursts in capabilities or in progress in the field, and then you get these, yeah, sudden bursts. Can you adjust the camera to look a little bit more this way, Annie? Oh, Annie's listening on the stream. She'll hear that in 30 seconds. Amazing. All right. So if you're expecting, yeah, much more steady improvement, like the current paradigm is going to take us all the way, and we're just going to get gradually more and more capable AI, and it's going to be LLMs or something that's mostly LLMs all the way. You're expecting this, and some companies have more or less explicitly stated they expect this to be the case. I believe that OpenAI's kind of safety alignment plan is very, very much assumes this type of world. Whereas if you're expecting some breakthrough in a totally like different architecture, or if you're expecting once you hit a certain level of computational training in LLMs, you get a sudden burst in capabilities, you're looking more at this world. And I think this is pretty important in terms of if you want to do more theoretical research versus more empirical research. In this world, empirical research tends to be a lot more useful because it will more likely inform things in the near future. Whereas in this, trying to understand, like establish theoretical foundations might be more impactful. Oh no. I think we need to click back on the slides again. That's all right. I don't know how to do that, Annie. Thanks. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the ITN framework, that is importance, tractability, neglectedness. This is a framework from the effective altruism community. I think it's developed by Holden Karnofsky about 10 years ago. I personally find this one very, very useful. It's when you're thinking about some sort of cause area or taking some sort of action, you're going to want to think about how important is it. Um, if it's not, yeah, basically, is this like an important thing to be working on? Um, there are some good positive impacts you can have, but if they're very, very small, then it's not as useful. You have to think about tractability, which is like, even if there's like a really, really important issue, that might be at like a grand scale. If it's just a very, very difficult thing to actually make progress on, that would be untractable. Whereas if something has a lot of like low-hanging fruit for you to sink your teeth into, then it's highly tractable. And the last, which is I think particularly relevant to what we're doing today, is neglectedness. Like how many other people are working on it. So take something like climate change, for example. I would consider this to be like pretty high in importance, pretty high in tractability, but very low in neglectedness. This is like a global issue. A lot of people consider this to be like, one of the like either the most or in top 3 most important issues that there is, on Earth. AI safety by comparison is probably like lower in terms or more neglected, although it's been increasing in like salience over the last few years. And so I'm going to come back to this quite a few times during the rest of the talk when I talk about the different subfields. This one's really important. Does anyone have any questions about this? I want to make sure we know this one before going on. Annie? It seems like there's a trade-off between these three and making the diagram. Is it actually the case? Oh, not necessarily. Yeah. It's just a triangle. Yeah, I'm realizing it sounds like if it's high in importance, it might be less tractable and neglectedness. That's not the case. Good call. So yeah, you might find something that's very important, very tractable, and very neglected. If so, strongly consider doing that thing. Yeah. Yeah. There's also doing nothing is low on all of these. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, a lot of people doing that. It doesn't help. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Another thing, very basic concept, personal fit. What's that? Doing nothing? Yeah, I guess you're probably, that's true. It's high in tractability. All right. Personal fit. This might seem obvious when you're writing it down, but I think sometimes people forget to account for this. They will only think about what's the most important thing that needs to be done. I guess if you're like a very, very conscientious person who can make yourself grind away for years and still be happy doing so, then this is less important if you're just a broadly capable person. But like burnout is a thing. There are people who force themselves to do things that they hate because they thought it was important for years, and then I think that takes a greater toll than people can sometimes expect. So yeah, ask yourself, am I good at this? Do I like it? Can I get paid for it? That is important. You have to eat. Or yeah, actually, if this is something you volunteer in your spare time, then that's less important if you have another job. But yeah, all good things to consider. I don't know why I keep pointing it here. I should point at the laptop. Okay. All right. All right. Now we're going to get into the real meat of the presentation, concrete approaches. What I'm going to go through here is I'm going to go through a bunch of different fields within AI safety. We're going to list on here what some of the kind of skill sets required for that are, what the day-to-day job looks like, and what the subfields are. I'm not going to read it all to you, but on each one I'll try to give you my take on like what some of the useful frameworks are for approaching those. So first we're going to talk about technical areas. So one, we got adversarial robustness. That is effectively making sure that the tools can't be used in bad ways. So by the way, I've seen some people taking photos of the slides. I'm happy to, you're welcome to, but I'm also happy I can just give you the slides later on as well. So yeah, all right. But go nuts, yeah. Oh, that's true, yeah. This will be posted on YouTube. All right. Right, so adversarial robustness, yeah, making sure, this very, very obviously ties into the misuse scenario. If you're very, very concerned about that area, less concerned about other areas, possibly a good field for you, you're making sure that people can't use your AIs to do bad things. Again, typical example is making sure that your AI system does not give people instructions for creating mustard gas or something else like that. Yeah, so again, you're going to want a pretty technical background for this one. This is very, very like very, very oriented towards technical work. You're basically going to be running experiments. If you come from a security background and you're used to a lot of red teaming, like trying to figure out all the holes in some system, this is possibly a good field for you. Yeah, there's a bunch of things, researching jailbreaking, backdoor research. I will make one comment about this, and I'm going to say this again for the next like few items as well. As a technical field, this is very, very well. There's a strong incentive for companies to fund this already. You know, if someone uses Google Gemini to commit an absolute catastrophe, that's going to, like, Google does not want that. That will be bad for their bottom line, for their reputation, their company, their, you know, employees will be unhappy, and I would imagine that they themselves will be unhappy in a direct way. So because of that, I think there's actually quite a lot of incentive and funding for this type of work already. Now, by going into the field, if you're very talented, you are kind of making it cheaper for them to get access to, like, you know, more skilled researchers on this side of things. But I definitely expect this to be a less neglected area going forward. Next, we have scalable oversight. The basic idea here is right now we have these AI systems that are in a lot of ways less intelligent than humans are. As they become much more intelligent or scale up, it can be more difficult to make sure that they are doing what you want them to do. Again, just think of this with people. It's a lot easier to ensure that, like, a child, if you're responsible for a child, it's a lot easier to make sure that they're to kind of safeguard and like their behavior and make sure they're not doing things they don't want to. Whereas it would be a lot more difficult to do that if you had to do that to a person who was like, you know, like 300 IQ and like twice your size. Much more difficult. That's the basic idea here. You're trying to figure out technical ways to guide AI behavior that will work even when these systems get much, much more powerful. So again, I would say this suffers from a similar criticism of the last one in that it's going to be comparatively less neglected than some other areas because, again, the frontier labs really don't want their systems to go off the rails. That would be bad for business. This is actually good news in that I think they're like funding a lot of work here. I think this suffers from a bit less of a problem than adversarial robustness in that for the types of scalable oversight that I think are really, really important, which are trying to think about like, how do we make sure we have oversight over superintelligence, that requires a bit more forward thinking. And sometimes markets are a bit more short term in their incentives. So if you are interested in going this field, I would strongly encourage you to do so while thinking about the much longer term. Instead of thinking about like, oh, how do we make sure next year's model, we have proper oversight. I would urge you to think really hard about like, what are systems that really, really are scalable and go further. And yeah, again, very, very technical field, similar background to what you want in adversarial robustness, maybe a little bit less inclined towards a kind of cybersecurity type thinking, but yeah, still a lot of technical designing experiments, etc. All right, AI alignment. I was annoyed at myself in this category in that it's a little bit more vague, but this is kind of AI alignment in a very classical sense. If you were one of the few people paying attention to this issue 10 or 15 years ago, this was all the rage. This is very much like trying to solve the technical problem of establishing robust kind of goals and values in AI systems. A lot of the stuff was very, very theoretical for quite some time. Again, you're going to lean this way if you are expecting, let's say, if you expect LLMs to hit a wall, but you're expecting progress through some other architecture or something that incorporates LLMs but heavily relies on other stuff. This might be a field to consider going into. Yeah, there's been a lot of like there's a lot older literature in this space than other fields because it doesn't rely on as much empirical stuff. Like adversarial robustness is kind of inherently, you can't really, it's hard to do that kind of work unless you actually have systems already in place, whereas there was a lot of theoretical work done here more. But there has been kind of a slowdown in this field, partly because basically a lot of the research hit some dead ends and stuff. But yeah, worth considering if you are expecting a big paradigm shift of some kind, or if you expect LLMs not to pan out, but you're still very concerned about AGI in some way. All right, then we have interpretability. For those who don't know, interpretability is, how do I describe it? So the way LLMs are trained right now, you create an architecture that sets up a whole bunch of rows of neural nets, you feed it a whole bunch of data, and you get these strengthened connections between the neurons. And then afterwards, when you feed it data, it can produce meaningful outputs, which are useful. Compared to other types of technology we develop, we have a relatively poor understanding of how this is accomplished. People have been describing it as a black box. It's a bit more of a gray box now, I would say, thanks to mechanistic interpretability, but it's kind of like neuroscience on large language models, trying to figure out if we can understand different bits and pieces of the insides of the LLMs. This one, I'm a bit more confused about how important it is you go into it. There's been a big surge in interest in this field in the last couple of years. Are you stretching, or is that a question under him? Oh, stretching, okay. There's been a big surge of interest in this, largely because the field is suddenly, it's an inherently empirical field. And in the last few years, there's been been an increase in interest. It's debated, so there's been a lot of research going into it. Anthropic in particular publishes a lot of research in the space, but it's debatable how tractable it's been. There's also, you should have some uncertainty about this area, because the line between doing safety research on this and doing research that accelerates the state of the art, very, very blurry for this one. It's very, very easy to come up with examples of how interpretability can just accelerate the development of AI in general. However, if we get very, very good at mechanistic interpretability, such that we can really, really track the insides and make tweaks to these AI systems, that seems like it could possibly have very, very big impact on things like scalable oversight or adversarial robustness. So yeah, for this field, I'm pitching it a little bit more to you. Look into it, make up your mind if you think you'd be a good fit for it. But think really hard about whether or not, how about tractable the field is, and whether or not you're actually you're helping safety as much as you are helping just move the field along. Right. The last example of technical AI safety work is evals. By the way, these 5 domains are not, it's not necessarily an exhaustive list. These are, I think that constitutes most of it, but there might be some stuff missing. But yeah, we have evals. That is building and designing tools and tests that help us measure AI capabilities. In the speed of development chart where I showed you showed you the kind of the chart that was showing how AIs can do longer and longer tasks, that was built by Meter. What they do are evals. That is just trying to figure out what AIs can and cannot do, and then use that to inform various safety and governance efforts. Like interpretability, I think this suffers from the problem of also being extremely useful for just accelerating capabilities in AI. So there's a risk if you go into this field that it might be kind of a wash, and you might just, sure, you help us make AIs a bit more safer, but you also make them more powerful, which kind of offsets that. Yes, go ahead. By what mechanism would evals make AI systems more powerful? I think the most obvious way, by informing research efforts, by allowing if you join a frontier lab and you develop really good evals, that's going to help their capabilities research team just choose what avenues are just a lot more effective. I imagine there's probably another couple ways. Anyone have other ideas on Anson? Right. So yeah, again, that's one reason to be maybe a little bit cautious about this field. One reason to not be cautious about this field is if you're specifically going into evals for an org that's not one of the frontier labs developing the AI. There are some wonky incentives for labs to develop evals that kind of promote the usefulness and safety of their models, and might downplay kind of the risks associated with their models. And so evals done by independent orgs are, I think, avoid some of those pitfalls. So if you're interested in this field, I would nudge you a bit more towards, independent bodies doing evals specifically. Yeah. Any other questions about this one? Cool. All right, so that's it for technical AI safety stuff. Now we're going to move on to governance and activism stuff. So activism, that is, okay, you're worried about AI systems being built that might do bad things, you could petition the government or society as a whole, just try to protest their development and make them not be built. So there's, I think the biggest movement for this right now is called the Pause AI movement. I imagine there are other ones coming down the pipeline. Yeah, so this involves this is essentially activism as you know it, just targeted AI. Some of them will protest in front of the companies themselves. Some of them will protest and advocate to government themselves. And it's not all about necessarily stopping the development of AI. Like some of it can be activism in favor of certain types of regulation. This is probably the one area that I think is like plausibly helpful, but I recommend the least. And the reason for that is my expectation of how neglected it will be. That is, I think that it's a very, very natural human reaction to if you see a problem or are worried about something, you get mad about it and demand someone do something about that, and that's usually the government. And I expect that as AI systems become more powerful and we may see some more negative impact and this becomes more known across society, I think we're going to get a disproportionate number of people getting involved in this type of stuff. That's not necessarily bad, but I do think it's likely to be the least neglected. It's a little bit easier to get involved in. You know, most people don't have the capacity to switch careers and go into adversarial robustness. But, you know, signing petitions and showing up to protests, et cetera, is something people can more easily do. So yeah, this is one, if you're like really considering, okay, should I go into like organizing activism or should I go into like international policy development? I would probably nudge you towards the latter. But yeah, that's my hot take. Right, international coordination efforts or governance efforts. Right, again, the nice thing about the governance area is that like a lot of these fields have existed in other domains, and you can just sort of like copy paste what that career looks like, but about AI. That is, you know, if people have experience with international relations, diplomacy, policy development. So a lot of what this looks like is people kind of imagine going to the field that it's like, oh, you're doing research and then writing reports on, you know, what government policy should be. Speaking to someone who works in that field earlier today, apparently that's about 20% of the work. A lot of it has to do with properly communicating that research, you know, to governments, to, you know, international bodies, and like really, really selling your work. So there's some overlap with activism there, but it's usually a lot more kind of targeted lobbying rather than, you know, you're probably not going to put your policy research report on a sign and pick it outside Parliament. But, you know, there is some, there is a greater degree than you might expect of basically selling your work in this case. So maybe you might join an org where there's a division of labor where they have like, you know, a team that does the research and writes the reports, and then they have other people whose job it is to communicate to lawmakers about this type of stuff. But yeah, if you are interested in governance efforts and you're really interested in doing stuff in Canada, like for Canada, I think this is a great area. Partly for reasons I'll explain on the next slide, but like Canada does have a history of leading on international coordination efforts. We do have pretty strong bang for our buck in terms of like influence on the world stage relative to like our population and economy size. But yeah, so this is something worth thinking about. And again, also like a really important area if you're concerned about power concentration in terms of like differences between countries, if you're concerned about like arms race dynamics and runaway kind of where militaries take greater and greater risks to develop advanced AI systems. So the military, this is one area you could possibly think about. So domestic government efforts, very, very similar in a lot of ways. I guess you don't need the international relations piece as much. But you know, if you're gonna have legal expertise, it's helpful to have that in a specific country. If you really want to do this one, you probably want to do it in the United States, because that is where all the world's leading AI systems are being developed. It doesn't look as though that's going to change anytime soon. Arguably, the second most important country would be China. Canada right now, despite historically being at the forefront of AI, right now does not possess any of the leading labs. We're not too bad on the global stage, like Cohere's here and they do quite well, but they are definitely in a different tier than Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google DeepMind. So for that reason, I probably working on domestic governance efforts in Canada, not as useful as as possibly moving to the United States or doing efforts there. All right, there's another one called field building. This is a generic term. I'm curious, who has heard of this term before? Okay. Oh, this is new to a lot of people. Cool. This is what I do. I think this is really cool, so you should do it too. No, it's this is essentially making it easier for everyone else doing all the other stuff to do their jobs. One analogy I like to use is if you are interested in medicine, let's say you really want to be a doctor of some kind. Medicine as a field has existed for hundreds of years. There are thousands of years. There are huge institutions. You go to this thing called university. They, have a whole bunch of like really well tailored material and courses and professionals teaching you the material. You get 1 or 2 degrees, and then by then you've specialized, and you go and you apply for a job, and you kind of know like roughly what that job is going to be like. They've trained, the hospital you go to has trained many people. You learn how to do it and you get paid. The field of AI safety has not existed for very long. Like, there is no like AI safety degree. Like, I mean, there is like a brand new course at U of T called, AI alignment that was launched 2 years ago. But we are effectively building this field as we go. So that means building out a whole bunch of the infrastructure, and make it easier for people to get involved. What I am doing right now, speaking to you guys, this is field building. So if you're in university, consider like organizing a university group or joining one, running kind of boot camps or training programs, effectively like building out the educational programs we need to help people do this, or, contributing to an org that does that. Doing things like grant making, like distributing money to the people who need to keep doing their work, that kind of stuff. This area I think is really good if you don't have a particular niche, if you're a jack of all trades, if you are a generalist like myself who's not particularly good at any one thing, maybe is a little bit ADD. Yeah, this is something worth considering. If you really think you're a good fit for this, actually come talk to me, because over the next year we may be hiring some field builders to help us run trajectory labs. I think this is comparatively neglected as well. I think, I should clarify. I think starting new field building efforts, very neglected. If you are the type of person that can come up with ideas for new types of bodies or orgs or projects that can accelerate our development of the field, huge demand for that. There are people who will fund you. There's actually kind of the opposite impact right now, where if you're just kind of like a generalist who wants to do operations, you have a lot of competition for a very limited number of roles in the field. So yeah, I'll highlight this one, especially if you think you're the type of person that can start an org of some kind. Right, philosophical foundations. This is effectively like getting better at reasoning about the world in general, helping us like establish even better frameworks than the ones I've had here. Like, the ITN framework upon which I heavily rely is this type of work. Yeah, this is for people who are very philosophically inclined. You like working with logic. You like, working on things that are pretty theoretical. You don't mind working kind of one step removed from the actual AI systems themselves. AI consciousness is a really interesting area. This is a real field now. Like, Anthropic has hired a AI welfare individual. I forget what the actual job title is. I will say this as well. Be very skeptical of anyone you meet who's super confident one way or another about AI consciousness. There are a lot of people who are just like totally sure that like it's not a real thing. How can you even consider that? And there are other people who are like the opposite. I think that the honest answer is that we just don't know very much about this, and it has some pretty massive implications. So yeah, if you have a deep philosophical background, like especially if you're in university right now, I think this is something you could absolutely work on, like in a few years. And it's not just consciousness; this is also things just like understanding like our moral uncertainty better. One of the challenges with the technical AI alignment side of things about like trying to instill our values and goals one of the big challenges there is that like we don't really understand human values and goals in a really concrete, definable sense. And so yeah, I think the philosophical foundations are really important for informing things like AI alignment. For those who don't know, actually like the Anthropic's model Claude, it's the main competitor to ChatGPT. Like its personality is designed by a moral philosopher. Like that's her job. And so there is like, yeah, very interesting work to be done here. Prioritization analysis. Yeah, again, some overlap with the previous slide, but a bit more quantitative. That is enhancing our understanding of the world, of AI progress, of everything, so that we can make better informed decisions. This type of work is important for identifying more fields that perhaps we're not paying attention to yet, or for helping us understand we should perhaps, downgrade our assessment of one field or increase our assessment of another field. So again, just for someone who's very quantitatively inclined, and I would say like the quantitative version of this type of stuff. But yeah, I think it's really important we have some people doing this. I am a bit confused and uncertain as to whether or not we have too many or not enough. I would guess because it's not like an intuitive thing people think about, where it's like, oh, I'm worried about AI. I better go into the field of like trying to get better understanding of how to prioritize things. It's so I would guess this is probably relatively neglected. So I think you're a good fit for this. Think about it. Rohan's skeptical. Yeah. No. All right. Okay. Improving information environment. Again, I guess you could say this is almost like a more general version of the cause prioritization thing. But yeah, stuff like science journalism, epistemics research, that would be similar to the philosophical foundations thing. But yeah, anyone who works in like forecasting or like trend analysis, yeah, if you don't know about the field of like forecasting or prediction markets, super interesting. But they can be very, very informative as to where we should prioritize our efforts. So again, this is more kind of auxiliary work, but making it better for for society to have conversations about these things, having more of our debates be kind of data driven. This type of work, again, I think this is like super important, and again, might be less intuitive right away. But if yeah, if you think, sure, maybe you're not like an expert in international relations, you don't have super good technical chops, but you are pretty confident in your ability to like do journalism really well in like a very, very reasoned, thoughtful way, which I would argue them. I think the more that labs fund governance efforts, that's effectively like them lobbying for things. I think there's a greater risk of things going wrong there, and it's really, really important for more independent bodies to be working on that. So I would, yeah, nudge people a little bit more. If you're really kind of on the fence between technical and governance work, I would nudge you a little bit more towards governance, except for activism to the extent that that's governance. I'm just expecting that to be like, we'll have enough people doing that kind of thing. So I wouldn't necessarily go in that direction. Yeah. So if you do want to influence government in some way, I would do like if you've ever heard the concept of pulling policy rope sideways, the idea here is that like a lot of big questions in like government and policy generally have like two sides, both really, really trying hard to get their version of things done. You can imagine it like a tug of war, and if there's 100 people on either end of a tug of war rope, and you go and join one of them, you're probably not going to move the needle too much. But if you can find some way of pulling the rope sideways, that is like pushing for some sort of change that isn't politicized, that isn't like doesn't really offend or super excite one side or the other, that's one way to approach it. I think a lot of that stuff would look like becoming like a recognized expert in the field and doing advisory work, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'll say again, generalists really consider field building, like especially if you are the type of person who can do like a little bit of everything and you're highly motivated and hardworking, consider starting a new project or an org. Yeah, and very, very hardcore research oriented types. There's like really important research to be done in non-technical areas, which, yeah, non-technical, non-governance area is forecasting, trend analysis, that kind of stuff. That is the end of my presentation. Questions? Yes. Oh, no, and I should. If anyone has one, please raise their hand. Pulling policy rope sideways. How am I coming with a blank? Anson, you got one? What's an example for pulling a policy rope sideways? What does that mean? Oh, he wasn't listening. Damn it. Okay, what's a really politicized issue? Immigration, sure. Okay, so okay, how about taxation, right? A lot of efforts right now, like it tends to be the people on the left are in favor of more taxation, and people on the right are in favor of less taxation. Um, at least traditionally, that's been the case. So pulling policy rope sideways would be like adjusting the types of taxation that there are. Perhaps you kind of recognize like pushing for like a decrease in income tax in exchange for an increase in like a luxury tax, or like replacing property tax with a land value tax. Um, that's not necessarily going to be like super depoliticized, but you're probably going to like you're more likely to have a positive impact there rather than just like advocating to add or remove taxes in general. What was the example you gave? No. Immigration, yeah. Okay, no, immigration is another one. Like same way you could think like a lot of it comes down to like pro or anti-immigration. You could probably push for efforts to like I know streamline the immigration process for for one group or like change the conditions for like another group. Yeah. Thanks, Annie. Yeah. Yeah. Happy to take a few more questions. Yes, go ahead.
Is there something the end user can do, like not being an activist? So it's a thought that came into my mind is I saw that Reddit is now closing it, or they already closed their APIs for access to these big systems. And I think the way the future will go is there'll be independent ecosystems and they will not share their data with each other so that they don't give uh, all everything to one person. So then as an end user, can I say that, you know what, have an iPhone, but have a Linux operating system and then keep your mail in uh, Google and then keep your maps in Yahoo?
Okay, I think I understand the question. You're basically asking, like, as an end user, like, can you move the needle in terms of your selection of which products to use? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I would say yes. I mean, I think that's probably lower impact than a lot of these things, but there are things you can do. Like one, do your best to stay informed of how the different companies are behaving, and then consider using tools from companies that behave in more responsible ways. That's the obvious way to do it. I don't know of any other ones off the top of my head. I think that your impact there will be pretty small. I mean, if you like, but yeah, that would be the main thing as a consumer. Um, I think that I would recommend that less if you're actually doing one of these things. If you're working in one of these fields full time, I think you should use whatever tools allow you to do your job most effectively. If you're not going to have an impact in any other way, then yeah, consider where you're spending your money and where you're spending your attention, and directing that towards places that behave more responsibly. But yeah, I think pretty small impact. Giles?
I was just going to add that there was a consideration that if you're using the products of the ethical company and avoiding the shitty company, then you can sort of advocate for other people to use those products to be like, okay, I use this is how it's good.
You could be an evangelist. Yeah, give them free marketing. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, or unless you're using the free version, in which case you should use as much as you can the products of people who are you do not want to succeed, because you will be consuming their resources for free. But yeah, again, I don't I think your impact there is going to be pretty small compared to doing anything else almost. Yeah. Yes. Mm.
I'd be interested to discuss that a bit more. Well, I mean, so first of all, I can say that like this is eventually going to become you know an issue later, and so people are eventually going to get the idea right. But I mean, like it's possible that it's going to. I mean, things can escalate very quickly. Like I mean, if you look at I think like the progress of ChatGPT, for instance, right? Like I think it exceeded everyone's expectations. Like I think right, and like if something like that happened again, and we really need to have things figured out, right? And if that's what people got, if that's what got people to get into activism, is that things started to really escalate again, right? We kind of want to be prepared and be ready for that, right? So it's like we don't really want to wait for things
I think I understand the question. You're pointing out that like even if I'm expecting activism to go up in the future, it might be too late at that point. Things might change very quickly before then. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. I mean, if you want that, I mean, I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and like also there's going to be other. I'm sure. It's kind of harder to change people's opinions once their opinions are set than to like give them an opinion about something that I haven't really thought about. You know what I mean? Like people are kind of stubborn that way. So if you can sort of get to people, I think before Peter Thiel or Mark Zuckerberg can, I think that doing it soon and fast, I think there's something to that.
Okay. So I'll try and summarize then. Like you're offering some thoughtful pushback on my um, maybe thumbs down on the activism approach by pointing out that things might change very very quickly and it's helpful to have some sort of activist base in place before then, so my expectation of people getting involved might be kind of too slow effectively. Also there might be counter activist movements that get people to have hard to change opinions already before it happens. I think these are valid points that may happen. That's also why I'm not telling you absolutely do not do activism. I'm telling you that I just think the other ones are more important. Um, I think it's also worth considering that like I think it's much easier to like let's say 3 years down the line you've been like really studying and working hard to have some sort of impact on mechanistic interpretability, but then you realize like, oh man, we really need more activism. You can pretty quickly make the switch from working in mech interp and going into activism. It's very hard to do the reverse. If like it turns out like you find yourself 3 years from now you've been doing activism and you're like, man, we don't really need any more of this. It's going to take you quite a bit of time to get upskilled and do the other efforts. But that being said, like I do take your point. I think there are many ways I could be wrong about the activism point. And if your choice is between like doing nothing or trying to positively influence an activist movement, like that's great. Go do that. Yeah.
Like if we, I mean, the activism is easier, right? So like if you have more people who are like working on the technical, the really technical AI safety problems, it's kind of easier for them to turn to activists than to from people go back to this to go into those other things, right? But I mean, ideally we'd have some sort of like treaty or something to slow down the arms race so that we'd have time to think through these really difficult technical problems, right? And I mean,
Yes. Yeah. More activism gives more time to.
political incentive for that is going to probably come from activism, right? So it's like if there's more activism, it's going to give us more time to work on these bigger problems. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, I don't want a world with zero activism. Yeah. I agree with you there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's also highly trackable too, right? Because I mean, there are strong arguments why the AI existential risk is a real problem that's worth taking seriously, right? And I think that just people aren't just really that aware of the arguments for it, and we should from the discussion I've had, just telling people about it, they're like, oh, that's very interesting. I haven't really gotten that much pushback from telling people about it, right? So I mean, you just need to tell people the arguments, right? So it's a very trackable thing, right?
Yeah. I agree. It's tractable. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Yes. Brown shirt here. Yeah.
I feel like people here in the crowd is pretty proud of understanding what this is, what's important. But so, like for example, I'm from Mexico, and people that are not in cities or they don't. I'm not sure if it has penetrated like AI just has penetrated those sciences. So how or maybe do you have any resources you can point to? Like how do you tell people that this is important? That's difficult, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna be very difficult for different groups. Like, I have no idea how to communicate to people who live in rural Mexico. I have gotten better at talking to people who show up to like our events here. So I'm not sure. I haven't spent too much time thinking about that particular thing. Um, but like, if you think that's really important, then maybe consider activism or consider the work on improving the information environment, the kind of positive journalism on this kind of stuff. A few years ago, when I was a bit more focused on trying to spread the word, as it was, I was involved with an org. Well, I still am involved with an org called AIGS Canada, and like we were like working very hard to like get op-eds in newspapers and make sure this was in the media. Like, yeah, getting in an issue that's like on people's minds. Like people have to be thinking about an issue first before they can like agree with you on it. I think Yeah, I'm also just like, how do I put it? Um, I don't know how tractable and important that is, and that like I think it's I personally feel as though I've had more success um, making sure people who were curious about this issue already could find me and talk to me about it. I have had very, very little success trying to get through to people who weren't already primed to be interested in it. Um, Now, that doesn't mean necessarily it's like that in general. That could just be my personality and the type of arguments I make, but that's what my experience has been. So sorry, I can't give you a better answer. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Just curious to learn your thoughts on the governance sweet spot. So you have the EU AI Act, which is very risk based, whereas in the US it's like let's not have any regulation almost now.
Yeah, that seems bad.
Yeah. So and I'm also very interested because you said this, pulling policy rope sideways. It usually means hitting a middle ground, but in this case, the middle ground might also not work, right? So I'm just curious to hear your take on where you think the governance sweet spot we should be aiming.
Um, I don't know. What I'm trying to do is get more people involved in policy research so that you guys can figure that out because I don't have a policy background. I agree that zero regulation is very bad. Um, I don't think it's necessarily the case that like you want like okay, this may be a bit of a nitpick, but I think is an important nuance. In that like pulling policy rope sideways does not necessarily mean going for the middle ground and being like, why can't we just compromise? It's usually finding some idea that meaningfully moves the needle, but just along a dimension that isn't politicized. Um, Again, this isn't a direct answer, but I think one thing to keep in mind is that like if you too strictly regulate in one jurisdiction, you simply drive development or consumption of that industry to another jurisdiction. Um, so um, I think that like having frameworks that account for that are really important, which is why I'm like, especially as someone from Canada, I'm more bullish on things like international kind of coordination on these issues. Um, but yeah, I don't have a single simple answer. I think this is also like very new. It's only been in the last year or two that people concerned about um, transformative AI or X risk have been getting involved in a big way in the policy space. So it's still very early days. Like we need to figure that out. Yeah. Giles.
When it comes to putting the rope sideways, if there's an appetite for a certain amount of regulation, we can try it. Maybe put your effort into making sure the regulations are better and like be more effective. And like look at the point of this actually
Rather than what?
rather than just more regulation.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, Giles bringing up a good point that like we don't necessarily want more or less regulation or look for the middle ground of like 50% regulation. Often, like adjusting the quality of the regulation is really important. Yes.
So are you worried about the Duan's paradox, which is the more efficient something becomes, the more we end up using it?
I'm familiar with Jevons paradox, but I don't know why I should be worried.
My point is, if we start bringing all these regulations, and if one of these companies actually say, oh, for this regulation, we have a countermeasure and this is what it is, it may not be a countermeasure, and that just makes everybody go crazy into AI.
Could you give an example for a measure and a countermeasure? I don't understand.
So let's say that we are saying data centers use water, and so because water is a scarce resource, AI is a problem. Let's say there's an activation activism like that.
Okay. I think I understood your point. So, some people are concerned about water usage for AI. If you want to know why, I think you should not be worried about this, but I'll talk later if you want. But like, let's say we are, then some efforts will be like, oh, we need to develop AI systems that like use less water. But like historically, if you'd like develop a more fuel efficient car, like the original cars were just like wildly inefficient in terms of the amount of petrol they consumed. Jevons paradox is this phenomenon where if you solve that and make cars more fuel efficient, people consume even more fuel because it's cheaper for them to travel longer distances. So if I understand your point correctly, there's a concern here. If we try to solve one piece of it, be like, oh man, AI is causing like X problem. If they just make it more efficient, we might just get more of the AI. I have trouble thinking about how that would apply to things other than water usage, because water usage is itself a cost. Like the people who run data centers have to pay for the water and pumping it around and like building the systems in place. And so, whereas a lot of the other risks we're worried about, I don't think they're correctly modeled as um, like cost inputs for the development of AI. So I don't know where else that would impact things.
That was just an example. I don't have an example right out of my mind, but I'm saying if there is an activism and there is a way by which they are pacified, would that increase the usage? Water was just one example.
So what safety washing?
Oh, like
If we say AI is becoming unsafe, and then they came up with a proof or a white paper that says AI is safe, and now that get caught up, and now everybody is
yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So they call this safety washing, which is like a concern where like if we're like, oh no, like we're concerned about adversarial robustness, like, we're concerned that like these AI tools might be used to create, dangerous bioweapons, then companies might then develop some sort of mitigation that's like not that effective, but it is very marketable, and the people won't worry about that going forward. Is that the type of thing you're describing? Okay. I think that's a legitimate thing to worry about. I think the solution to that is to like think hard about like what you're calling for as an activist or the type of solution you're designing. Like um, what's the I think it's Goodhart's law is like when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a useful measure. You have to be very, very careful about like what types of incentive designs you have. I'm not sure how this impacts what fields you should or should not go into, other than this is a good thing to be mindful of when you're doing types of research or advocating for certain positions. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to like look at the AI safety levels for a topic. Like you say that there's ASL3, ASL4, and there are certain commitments when models will reach certain capabilities, we will implement these measures in order to like mitigate the risks. And then sometimes there was a post where Anthropic quietly backpedaled. So just before model release, okay, they changed their requirements for releasing a model, and then they pushed out anyway. So I think like be careful to like notice when these things happen, and raising like public question about it is like a good thing to do because a lot of people might not really get really feel, and we need to keep companies accountable to their commitments.
Yeah, actually, okay, I'm gonna say something. You'll be happy with this. Something positive about activism. Google recently is kind of they're having their feet held to the fire because they made a like non-binding but public kind of commitment to something. I forget the details of it, and it was determined they recently kind of like reneged on that, and so the Pause AI movement has organized like a petition and got like a lot of very prominent people to kind of call them out on this. Essentially, I think this type of activism is actually like quite good, like holding kind of companies and entities to their word. I think, yeah, I'm more thumbs up on that type of activism than most. But yeah, and that's one way to kind of push back against safety washing. Yeah. Yes. Can you please speak up?
The ones that were like towards the end were like more non-technical ones. The top one for field building still requires some technical knowledge.
For field building? Oh, okay. I mean, it's handy to have it. I mean, I come from a non-technical background and I do field building, so it's not a requirement. But yeah. Okay. Anyways, I take your point. Yeah, about a significant number of them requires technical skills. Yeah.
I just wonder, like, sometimes I'm not sure if this is a bias or if it's actually a good observation, but it feels that more times than others, the technical people ended up in the non-technical roles because of the credibility they get from understanding the technicalities. So for the non-technical people, how do you plan your career and how do you kind of acquire that technical knowledge from a, let's say, authoritative source person place quickly enough when efficiently and well?
Gotcha. Okay. So, oh, and then before I paraphrase the question, are you when you talk about technical people getting into non-technical fields because they have kind of credentials, is that something you observe generally, or do you think that's particularly true of AI safety?
I think it's true generally.
Gotcha.
Let's say you had like before AI it was something else, it was like dashboard building or data analysis. You'll have the engineers usually like working in, let's say, business roles who have that technical background and the knowledge and understanding of the inner workings. Um, and even in AI safety, they might take the person who knows technical stuff, had working experience on it with an MBA, with the policy background, the legal background, over someone with a legal background with a sprinkle of technical stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. So the question is about there seems to be this phenomenon where people more frequently move from technical to non-technical roles than vice versa. Um, and then what do you do about this if you are a non-technical person? They're taking our jobs. Yeah. Okay. So learn to code. No, I mean, well, actually, partly, yeah. I mean, one is just you can also learn to become technical. I think. Okay, so we're getting into the range of stuff I'm not really sure about, but I'll take my best stabs at it. I think one, it's just easier to move from very technical fields into non-technical fields. I think that's true for most people, so that's probably why you see more of that. Um, uh, I think people also I think people overestimate how hard it is to learn technical skills if you're non-technical. Um, there currently, right now, there are a lot of pretty good technical upskilling programs in the space. Like there are sorry. Oh, I thought someone said something. There's things like a kind of Arena or Pivotal or like ML for Good Bootcamp, which is happening in Canada in October. I don't know if they're taking signups or not. So one, just like learn technical skills is like a possible option. I think also the like AI tools are very, very good at helping you learn technical skills. Like I really wish I had access to an LLM when I was learning to code back in like when I was doing that, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago. So there's that. I'm not sure what else to do about it. I think partly what's going on in like the thing you're pointing at, I think is more true of this field than others. And my explanation for that is that I think that more technically inclined people have more likely been in groups that have been concerned about AI safety, AI risk for longer. And so I think there's just has been a greater number of technical people in this field. I don't know what to do with that information, but that's something I observe. Yeah. I don't have any other ideas for now. Yeah. But like also like you don't necessarily have to learn technical skills. Like, I think it's actually like probably what you're describing. I think is net good in that like it is helpful to have like people who can bridge that gap. And like I imagine that like a team of people trying to do like international policy. It's going to be a lot more effective if it has some people who've just been like, like from pure legal or pure like poli-sci backgrounds, along with people who have strong technical chops and moved over. I think that team is going to be a lot more effective than one that's like just purely non-technical background. So it's great. Work with them or build up your technical skills yourself. Yeah. Yes.
So you said you come from a non-technical.
Yeah, I studied classics in university.
So how did you get into this, I guess, what you're doing right now? Just curious.
Okay, let me give like the non-long version. I got really worried about it, and then I started a meetup group with my friend Giles over there, and then we just met every week and studied. And yeah, I mean, I didn't have a job for 2 years, which I don't necessarily recommend people do. It can be so I'm hesitant to describe my own path in a lot of detail because it's not necessarily something I recommend people do. You can do things. I think people really underestimate how capable. People overestimate how difficult it is to change fields. I think for a long time it has been true that for like most of human history you had one job and you did that for life. You got a degree and you went into that field. I think things change quickly enough now that if you're highly motivated and want to learn something, it's easier than you expect to be able to just go ahead and learn. Hello? Yeah. The internet is a beautiful place. Continue coming to our events. The reason Trajectory Labs exists is to assist people doing this career transition. So hang out here, talk to us afterwards. There's a few different people who've successfully, if you have successfully transitioned into the field of AI safety, raise your hand. Cool. Yeah, that's like 10% of the.
Any thoughts about AI safety being a partisan issue or not being a partisan issue? And if it's not a partisan issue, is that very much?
Yes, I think it's better if AI safety is a nonpartisan issue because it's easier to get stuff done, pulling policy rope sideways, that kind of thing. Um, I think it is becoming a bit of a partisan issue in the United States recently, for example. Um, I would strongly, if you even if you have very strong political beliefs, I do. I do my best to talk about AI in a way that isn't like really triggering or really appealing to one side or another. Um, Please do that. I think it's going to be very, very hard to get stuff done if this becomes like, yeah, strongly politicized. Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the reasons why maybe I'm a little bit more nervous about activism is because it tends to go along with partisanship. But that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, like I said, you know, the stuff that like holding companies' feet to the fire about, holding companies to their word is a type of activism that isn't necessarily politicized. You know, you said you would do it X, you know, do it. Yeah. But yeah, I think the strategy of like, oh man, we just need to convince my political party that this is the correct issue, and then just have them win all the elections, and that'll solve it. I think some people, when you say it out loud, it sounds like obviously a dumb move, but I think a lot of people tend to behave in that way. So, yeah, cool. Let's call it a wrap. Thanks again for coming. Your next slide, Annie. Thanks. Yeah, please, you're welcome to stick around, chat with everyone. There should be some food left still. If you're interested in keeping in touch with us, you can join us in the AIGS Canada Slack. It's Canada-wide AI safety advocacy org. It's also just like a great Slack community you can join and look for the Trajectory Labs channel. And then, yeah, this is our calendar on Luma. If you signed up on Meetup, you may have noticed I made you sign up on Luma. But yeah, so that's so you can find about upcoming events. I don't think we have anything else scheduled right now, but we will. We will have a bunch of events in September and October. And yeah, thanks again for coming.